for inviting me. So I hope everybody's doing well, keeping safe, and I guess we should just get right to it. Um, and stop me if I start rambling and say something stupid or whatever. So anyway, first question from Luis Fernandez. And again, I apologize in advance to anybody that I pronounce their name incorrectly. So please forgive me. Um, are you mixing fully in the box these days, or doing hybrid mixing? These days, I'm almost exclusively in the box. So sometimes I might use a few outboard pieces or maybe summing, but that's probably to the extent of it. There's really not that much more stuff to do that you can't do on just strictly in the box. With the amount of plugins and modeling gear that's being done by companies like UAD, you can get pretty close to the actual hardware. So Villy asks, what gear do you use? My main DAW is Pro Tools. I use the Control Surface. It's discontinued by Abbott, but mine still works fine, and she's been working fine since 2006. So I haven't changed anything. As I mentioned, I might use a summing box. I have two. I have an SSL and a Tube Tech. So my speakers are M Audios. Those are run by Bryson Amps. What else do I use? As far as headphones, I have Odysseys and Sennheisers. So that's, internally within the computer with Pro Tools plugins and stuff like that, I probably use UAD the most. Soundtoys, McDSP, Softube, Metric Halo. Those are some of the ones I use all the time. So let's see. Let's keep going. Alex Verno. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Can you talk about how much compression you typically use on mid-range instruments? I think it's hard to say specifically how much. It's just a matter of whether or not it's required. So as I listen to a song, I start understanding what the parts do. That kind of tells me what I should be doing to them. So I don't have a go-to like immediately it's a bass, therefore I'm going to compress it. It's just a figuring out process as I go along. So Drain My Blood wonders if he has bugs, if the webinar has already started. So yes, it has started. And let's see. So sorry, I'm reading through the questions. Connor Wallace, thank you very much. What is your approach when you start a mix or production? Greetings from Spain. So hello. Usually as a mixer, when I get material, I usually haven't heard it. So the first part of it is just me getting used to the song, learning the parts, getting a sense of what the song is trying to communicate, getting a sense of how the song should feel. And from there, I'm not much of a soloer, like just kind of tend to let things play, and I move things up and down as I figure out how everything fits. So that kind of that takes up the whole first part of it, is just me trying to get used to the song and learning how all the parts work together. So I think it also depends on the song. So if it's a very vocal-centric song, so my focus will be mostly on the vocals. If it's rap, I might focus on the stuff that lives in the middle, the kick, snare, bass and the lead vocal, and then if there's a main sample that runs across the entire track, those are probably my immediate focal point. Then everything else kind of comes afterward. So it's as far as production, I don't do very much production anymore. I almost exclusively focus on mixing. Occasionally, I will have to do some additional production to, just something's not quite working right. I need to change a part, change out a sound, that sort of thing. So again, I think it depends on what I'm given. And sometimes with discussion with the people, the creators of the song, the material, then I might have a better idea as well as to what I should and should not do. So let's hypothetically say there's there's an 808 in the song and I can't quite get it to fit. So I might introduce my own sample or create an 808 from scratch, and then try to incorporate it into the song. But I have to make sure that the tone and the character of the original is still going to be there. So I'll try to match it as close as I can. Let's see. Let's next get another question from Alex. Do you ever use OTT? I use OTT all the time. It's a great little plugin for discussion. Distortion. So I don't go to extremes with it usually, but yes, I definitely use it. Okay, so Harmoko Aguswan. What recent technique have you discovered that made your workflow mix better? I don't know. Unfortunately, I'm one of the more disorganized people. Like I'm not. And I wish I could be better organized. And I've seen some of my friends who work, and they're very structured. They start with one thing and they move on to the next, etc. And it just happens, and it seems to work great for them. But for me, it's never. When I start doing that, it never feels right. So as I mentioned earlier, the process is almost kind of unconscious. I sit down, I listen to the song, it gets looped. If there's a particular section that I want to focus on, I'll loop that section. And I just keep going, trying to fit everything in as I go along. And it doesn't, it's maybe not the most efficient method, but that's the way that's worked for me so far. So, and that's kind of how I've always done it. So I hope that's probably not very helpful, but then I hope you find a way that works for you. Find out from other mixers. I'm sure if you're following this channel and you're part of this community, you probably know quite a few of us and how we do things our own different ways. So, yeah, it's going to be different for everybody. So some of, and again, sometimes it could be a matter of time of day. You work better at night or you work better during the daytime. I try to basically get all the meetings and appointments and stuff like that done early in the day. So by say around 11, I'm in the studio and I can have an uninterrupted chunk of time that I can basically focus on, because this isn't something that's well, at least I haven't figured out how to time it. It's not like there's a start time, but there's really no end time. I just go till I get to a point where I'm comfortable, or I'm tired, or it gets done basically. So I'm just not one of those people that can say, okay, I'm going to be working from 12 to 6. It's just not how I can function. So Lee Rosario, what engineers are making you scratch your head these days and pushing you harder? Thanks. Um, that's pretty much everybody. All my contemporaries are doing really tremendous work. So I don't have, um, I don't know that it's making me scratch my head. I think it's just a matter of me trying to, um, I don't know how to properly say this, but it's not a competition. Like I don't view this as any kind of a competition. So my goal is always going to be um, pleasing my clients. So if I get hired to do a job, at the end of the process, I would like for them to be pleased with the results that we've achieved. That's all my goal. That's the only goal that I have. So whatever happens after the fact is not really any of my concern or worry necessarily. At least I don't look at it that way. Um, so once we get finished with what we need to do, then it's kind of like, okay, well, it's in the hands of the label and the radio people and the marketing people and the artists who will go out to bring this product out to the world. So when I hear something that's outstanding, I can always appreciate it for what it is, and I try not to worry too much about what someone else is doing. I just try to focus on what I am doing for my clients. So, but again, the guys that all my friends in the mixing community, they all do tremendous work, really. So, if you chances are you've probably seen a lot of their videos, their interviews. Heck, you might have been in person with them at the studio for one of these seminars. So you can definitely learn from them for sure. Connor Wallace, can you please share some of your experience with Jermaine Dupri and Kris Kross? Jermaine and I go a ways back. So we met in 1991. I was an intern at a studio called Soundscape. He was producing tracks for the first TLC album. So, and we just kind of got along. And the next, subsequent sessions that he had at the studio, he would always request for me to be part of the section. So eventually, when Jermaine started to produce more for himself, where he could make decisions, he would ask for me to engineer and mix. So we pretty much worked together since then. The first mix officially I did, I think, was the TLC remix also. That was 1992. And since then, I mean, we've done a fairly significant amount of work together. As far as Kris Kross, I didn't do anything on the first album except a remix for, I think, I Missed the Bus. And then the following albums, I did do most of the mixing. So, good times. I look fondly back in those days. Jermaine is basically going to be a lifelong friend for me. So he's probably the most important person as far as my career goes. Like without Jermaine, I wouldn't have a career in music. So Alex, again, how do you carve out space in the track for the vocal? Do you have a go-to frequency to cut and keys? Synth bass like 300. I don't have a specific frequency that I target because it depends on the composition of the track and it depends on the vocal. Sometimes even within the same song, if you have different vocalists, you may have to carve out different parts of the track for that particular vocalist. So for example, if you have let's say Usher featuring Ludacris, their voices are obviously very different. So with Usher, he'll be in the higher register, whereas Luda has a much larger voice. So Luda is one of those people who likes to He likes it to make you feel like he's right in your face, like you can feel the spit that's coming out of his mouth. So I try not to tame that part of it to do too much. So, but because his voice is so big, it will change the way I approach his verse or the tracks around his verse. So I don't know that there's a specific frequency that I can point to. You just have to. It's a case by case thing. And again, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to avoid your question. This is really how it is. So, okay. So, Eduardo Serafica. What is your go-to vocal chain at the moment, and what effects do you tend to use as a starting point? I actually don't have a vocal chain either. For recording, it used to be where for recording my chain would be a John Hardy mic preamp, a TubeTech compressor, the CL1B, and then that goes straight into whatever medium I'm recording to. And if I need to EQ something, I usually do it after the fact once it gets into the DAW. As far as when I'm mixing, I really don't have a chain, and I think a lot of time it depends also on the people I'm working with. Some of them will already have a chain that works. So, and if I hear that it's working fine, I don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. So, for example, if I get a track from Stargate, a fairly typical setup for them would be a Renaissance compressor, Focusrite D2, and a Pultec EQ, I believe. So those are kind of like, it might change from song to song, but those are kind of like the main things I see recurring a lot of times. So, and if it's working, I really don't try to mess with it too much. So I focus on the balance of it. So a lot of automation goes into vocals for me. They might have the left alone. So I might automate the threshold and release points and stuff, depending on how hard a salsa singer's delivering the lines. So, and level automation, that sort of thing. So I don't really know that I would, there's anything specific that I would go. I think it's different for every different artist. And again, for me, as a freelancer, a lot of times I'm getting material from a lot of different producers and different artists, so they all sound very different. So one size really does not fit all, and I can't just say, oh, I'm always going to be using this. So again, I hope that helps, and I'm not trying to avoid your question. It's just, that's just how I go about it. So next question, League of Lights. Which plugins blew your mind and took your mixes to another level? I don't know. Plugins typically don't. I view them as very simply tools. They're supposed to help me do my tasks, do my job, and and again, it's like any other craft. You can't just tell, a chef you can only use one tool. You can't tell a carpenter he can only use a hammer. You have a whole series of stuff that you use to be able to achieve what you need to do. So plugins, I think, maybe a little bit of a history here. So for me, when I was growing up, again, I'm old, so the music that I listen to is from the 80s and 90s. So most of the stuff was recorded in analog. So I tend to favor that type of a sound. Like that's what sounds good and natural to me. So right now, many of you are probably, there's a generation of you that grew up entirely on digitally recorded material. So you may not have the same kind of hang-ups as I do. So to um, I tend to prefer the very analog sounding things, and that's kind of why I mentioned UAD earlier, because a lot of the plugins are based on hardware and classic gear. Um, so that's kind of the stuff I tend to like, and that's kind of the stuff I tend to use in the first decade of my career. So up until I want to guess 98, when Pro Tools Mix Plus came out, that's really when I started getting into more in the box type of a process. It wasn't until maybe 2002 when HD came out that I actually bought a Pro Tools system of my own. So, quite a long, big chunk of my career in the beginning was all entirely analog. So that's kind of how I tend to like hearing things. So that's why I tend to favor those types of plugins. So if I hear very good emulation of a plugin of a analog device that I like, those probably are the ones I gravitate towards. Let's see. What Dr. Bo Lab, what upcoming engineers are you learning from? I view myself as a student just in general. And I'm trying to learn from everybody. It's not really any one person in particular. One of the articles I read all the time, well, at least every month, is the Inside Track article in Sound on Sound that Paul Tingen writes for Sound on Sound magazine. To me, that's a really fun way to see how other engineers and producers and mixers are doing what they do. So if you get a chance, if you're not aware of that article, I think it's not a bad investment of a few minutes of your time each month. So again, Dr. Bo Lab, what the newest technique with EQ? Do you honestly think any other DAW will knock Pro Tools off the industry standard throne? There's really no new technique as far as EQ is concerned. Typically, for me, the way I learn how to EQ things is with a parametric EQ. And I just basically try to find the frequencies that I don't tend to boost a lot of things. I tend to cut a lot of things. So I try to find the frequencies that bothers me, and then I basically dip those out. And what I do is if you don't know specifically which frequency you're going to, I'll just have a narrow band, boost it hard, and then just sweep through it and find it. And once you find it, then you know where it is, and you can basically dip it down. As far as the Pro Tools question, I don't really know. I use Pro Tools, but I'm sure many people use Logic, Ableton, FL. I have a friend that used Studio One. So there's really no, I mean, all the AWs basically do the same thing. I think it's just a matter of what you're comfortable with. So as you know, I have Logic. I know how to use Logic, but I just don't always feel very comfortable. It's almost like speaking in a different language. So while you might be able to speak it fairly well and converse, but you're not that fluent with it. So it's kind of like that for me. Whereas Pro Tools, because it was the first DAW that I got comfortable with, so I tend to I've stuck with that. So having said that, and again, you know, Pro Tools, let's just say Pro Tools does 100 things. You know, for what I do, I may only use 25 of those things. So along the way, they'll introduce new updates and stuff like that have new features. And a lot of times, if they're helpful for my workflow, then I'll adopt them. But then it's one of those things where it tends to be fairly unconscious for me. Like it's gotten to that point. So okay, let's go to the next question. Diljit Johar. wants to know about leveling things, how you level every element, especially drums and vocals. Um, I, I think I think I mentioned earlier before. A kind of a general rule for me is I try to focus on the things in the middle, because those are typically the largest elements in the song, and they take up the most space, but they also occupy the same space right in the middle. So you have to kind of make sure that they're all working together. So as far as a drum, if it's a drum set, so hopefully the drums are recorded properly and there's no phase issues, and that's really the first thing I try to fix if there's any issues, is if it's a drum kit. A lot of times these days it's never just a drum kit anymore. You're almost always combining drum samples with a drum kit. So, and then at that point it's just a matter of trying to figure out what has to be featured when. So in some cases, in some songs, if you're trying to create a breakdown section, for example, the program drums might drop out. So, and then so that the live drums now have to kind of be able to anchor the entire track. So they might have to be processed. They might have to be processed differently than when both the program drums and the live drums are in the same place. So it's, I think it's a lot of it is also instinct. Like I have a sense of what I think something should sound like. And again, I'm not always right. A lot of times when I finish a mix and I send it to the producers and the creators and the artists, they might come back and say, dude, you can have it completely wrong. Try to look at it this way. Or they might give me a different reference. And it informs me as to my decision how to move forward from there. So I don't really know. I don't know if that answers your question, but everything just has to fit in terms of where it's a piece of the puzzle. Like you don't want something to overpower something else, but at the same time you also have to understand what it's trying to do. So let's just say in the choruses the drums have to hit harder, but when what does it mean when something is supposed to hit harder? Is it supposed to be more sizzly? Is the focus does the focus have to be more on the high end side of things, or does it have to be more on the driving, the low end, low mid side of things? And how does that interact with the rest of the track? So again, interaction between the elements within the song is really the key to how you fit everything together. And again, it's unlikely that you'll be able to just do it one time from the beginning and just let it be. You'll have to adjust it as the song goes along. So, next question, Braden Williams. What do you think of compression over a whole drum bus? Do you do it? Do you prefer to keep elements free and move and use parallel instead? I use a drum bus and I use parallel as well. And again, it just really depends on the drums and what it needs. I won't know what it needs until I actually hear it. I won't really know. Sometimes a session will come to me with all the stuff already basically laid out. Like in terms of if the producers are working in Pro Tools, they might give it to me in the Pro Tools session form with the plugins already in place and the compression, parallel, stuff like that. So what I do in that situation is I just try to basically go over just try to study what it is that they did. If I don't agree or if I don't think what they did works, I will just go ahead and remove the plugins and insert my own or try a different technique. So it's just again, it's really trial and error as you go along. So sometimes sometimes I believe my own hype and I do something and I come back and I go, well, they did it better. So I just go back to what they had. It's just really there's no formula to it. It just really has to depend on what the song needs. So let's see. Connor Wallace, what's your mix bus in 2020? I don't have a specific mix bus in any year. Some years it just depends on. Some years a particular trend, if you would, might be a particular trend might have kind of take, so like say for example, at one point a lot of people were using ozone, so that has a very kind of a pretty specific sound. So if that's what the clients want, so I would try to basically make sure that I incorporate some of those types of tones for them. Things that I use on Mixbus, I will use OTT on the Mixbus. I use the FabFilter Pro Qs. Let's see, the DSM, a dynamic spectrum mapper. I use that quite a bit. Let's see what else. Oxford, the inflator, I use that just to give it a little bit of bump at the end sometimes. So again, I don't have as a rule, just like, oh, this is the same thing I will use all the time. It's just a matter, and even within those units, I might try different things. So instead of a song might sound better with a clipper, for example, instead of a limiter, or vice versa. So just, again, I think it really just depends on the song. I don't know that I have a set mix bus. I probably have 3 or 4 different ones in terms of in my template that I import from, and then from there I'll just kind of eliminate things or add things in as I see necessary. What tips do you have, Eduardo Serafica? What tips do you have to achieve such clean mixes? Well, I'm glad you think they're clean, but in some cases they're not meant to be clean. So sometimes did a recent mix for Usher recently with Little John producing, and his first comment was that, dude, the mix is too clean. So we had to really go back and dirty it up. So it's not again, I think being an engineer, a lot of times your first instinct is to clean up stuff, and a lot of times it might not actually be the correct thing to do. So I think it's just really a matter of cleaning out stuff that you don't, clearing out stuff that you don't need. So for example, there's almost no information below 100 to 150 hertz besides the kick drum and the bass a lot of times. So for most of the other instruments, I will just, I can clean out a lot of that stuff. And what I do is basically I just do a filter, and I basically sweep it to the point where I hear a difference. And once that filter affects the sound, then I know it's starting to maybe not do what I'm taking away too much. So then I'll stop right there. So maybe that's a way for you to be able to to get things to sound clean right from the go. But again, I think as a mixer, you're kind of at the mercy of what you're being given. So a lot of credit has to go to the producers and the arrangers and the engineers that recorded it for the work that they put in. So if they give me good stuff, they give me good ingredients, then I can hopefully make a good dish. So that's so a lot of times when people ask me, what's the key to a good mix, and I tell them it's good recording. So I think sometimes people might focus a little bit too much on the mixing side of things, and I can understand it, because that infers that you're getting closer to the end result. But it doesn't have to be this way, because we're working mostly in DAWs these days, your workflow can be recording, mixing, arranging, editing, all at the same time. And that's kind of one of the things I discovered when I started working with the Neptunes. And that's how they always did it. You would get a session and it would be, it would be so small that it would fit in an email. And you kind of go, this can't be it. But then the process continues. So, I'll do the first pass of what they give me, then it goes back to them. They'll incorporate new stuff, rearrange stuff, comes back to me. I'll write more. I'll do more stuff. It goes back to them. They'll come back. So it's a process. So I think again, clean isn't necessarily. I'm not worried about clean. I'm more concerned about right. Is it right for the song? And that's really the most important thing that I try to not lose sight of. So again, same concept. If you're mixing a heavy metal song, then you're probably not going to put a really pretty, Celine Dion type of a reverb on it, on the vocalist's voice. And vice versa, you just have to go with the flow. But again, that's just generally speaking. Of course, there are cases where you might want to have a very stark contrast between the message and the way something feels. But generally speaking, you want to kind of go with the flow. So, okay. FMVC sings. What are your tips to make the vocals sit amazingly in the mix? I think, again, you have to see what the vocalist's tone is, and what the vocal and how it fits within the track that it's supposed to live in. So if it's a song that's let's say it's a very quiet song, it's a piano and vocal song, and those are really hard to mix actually, despite the fact that they're just very few elements, because you have nowhere to hide anything. So you have to very, very, very carefully just watch everything along the way and the entire way. So again, the key is the message. What is the message of the song? What is the lyric trying to convey to the listener? Is it meant to be kind of like a very personal thing? Is it meant to be kind of a very, I don't know, spacey kind of thing? So if it's a very personal thing, like if it's someone that's, the singer wants you to feel like you're right in front of them, say like an Adele, for example, then you try to probably not do a whole bunch of effects necessarily. Or if you do effects, they're basically done in a very, very transparent way. So if it's a rock song, for example, then chances are you might want to have a little bit of a struggle between the vocals and the track. So because that creates the tension that the song's trying to get across. So it just really depends on what you mean by sit in the mix. For me, again, I rely a lot on the input of of the creators of the music. So there will be times where they'll tell me that something's too loud, something's too soft, and so on and so forth. And again, if you have a group of vocalists, for example, then there might be, obviously then you have to try to make sure that everybody's equally featured and no one gets too much of a shine over somebody else. So I hope that helps. Naveen Kumar, are you mixing any differently now for Spotify? No, I'm not. Again, my very simple focus is to get something that my clients are happy with. That's all I focus on. So at the end of the day, once it gets to mastering, they might do something to address those kinds of issues, but I actually don't do. I don't focus on that at all. So, and again, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's just me. So, let's see. Okay, sorry, my screen just jumped here. I know what everybody wants. 8Media 888. I don't know what I know what everybody, sorry, wants to know what plugins he uses. Should be how he uses it. Okay, so that's not a question, sorry. How do you route all your analog comps, reverbs, hardware in the box? As I mentioned, I don't really use too much hardware anymore. So a lot of the stuff is basically, if I use anything, it's really at the end of the process. It's more like for mastering purposes or summing. So I used to use some hardware, like a Manley mastering EQ and inverse connections mastering EQ, but I haven't used those in quite some time. So if I do go out of the box these days, it's mainly for summing. So it's at the very end. Okay, so let's see. Okay, Bruno Nascimento, can I ask what's your approach for subgroups on a mix? I tend to group things kind of by their instrument group. So, if there's a live drum kit, that's one subgroup. If there's a percussion, there are a bunch of percussion track, that's one subgroup. If there's like pianos and keyboards or pads, that would be one subgroup. Background vocals, depending on the part, could be several subgroups. I don't tend to group vocals, like lead vocals. So it's really just if once I get the balance anyway, so then then they'll get grouped. So the balance is still the first thing that I basically try to focus on when I start doing anything. How do you know FMVC sings? How do you know when and where to use multi-band compression? I don't. It just really depends on. It really just, again, depends on the situation. So now there are times where I have to use multi-band compression because of the way the producers or songwriters want it to sound. Because you're looking for a specific kind of, multi-band compression does have a thing to it. So I tend to not use multi-band all that much. I might use it more on vocal subgroups like background vocals. So, but I almost never use multi-band on drums. Again, I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. It's just, I just haven't found that it works all that much. Maybe because I tend to be naturally aggressive when it comes to drums. It just pumps maybe a little bit too much. So I think it's just, again, you have to see what it's calling for. It's one of those things that I don't put salt on stuff I eat just as a matter of course. If it needs it, I might put some in there, but if it doesn't, then I don't. So if you're looking for that type of a sound to it, then it's great. Now, having said that, multi-band will give you a little bit more control over if you have something that's a kind of a wide band. So, and when I was younger, I used to have a lot of problems with the bass, and it wasn't until a little bit later when I discovered that if working on bass as if it's two instruments, like the low and low mids, and then the high and high mids, are and that was like kind of like my little breakthrough with the bass instrument just in general. So I focus on two separate parts of it. So multiband will help you achieve that kind of thing if you're using compression, or you could just create multiples of it and then go and treat it differently for those specific frequency bands. Owen Hunt, what was your vocal chain for Rihanna and Drake record? Oh my goodness, that's too long ago. I can't remember. Again, I had to give credit where credit is due. Marcos, who recorded the Rihanna vocals, he did a fantastic job. So when it came to me, there wasn't really a lot of guesswork as to what was required of me. Like, it was just at that point in time just a matter of making sure that at the end of the day the record soared. So I'm sorry, Owen, I can't remember. My memory's just not that good. What master processing do you use, and do you insert it right away? This is from Phil Alayuma. Again, sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. What master processing do you use, and do you insert it right from the beginning when you start mixing? I don't do it right off the bat. The first thing I usually do is just try to get a balance. Once I have the balance, then I start adding stuff in terms of the overall picture. So I do have templates ready, not necessarily, well, it's just I think it's just more, the templates come from experience. So it's kind of like, okay, well, I've done X amount of dance records. So these kinds of processes seem to work well with those types of music. So that might be one track on my template. So these types of processors seem to work well with background vocals. So that might be another. Again, there might be 4 or 5 things in that chain, but I don't necessarily use all of them, because again, there might be 2 different types of de-esters on there. But I might only use one of them, or if I don't, I might not use them at all if I don't need to. So back in the analog days, the mastering device that I used most frequently was the SSL mixing, the compressor. So that sound was was in a lot of the records I liked listening to. So I tend to, if I'm looking for master bus compressor, that's the one I might go reach for. So Diljit Johar, at what level do you send your mix for mastering? I send usually these days, a lot of times when I get rough mixes, they tend to have some sort of a limiter or something that makes it loud already on the rough. So I think it makes the listeners, they're used to hearing it that way. So when I send a mix back to them, I try to make sure that it's at least at that level, to where it's not something that's so completely out of the blue that it changes the way they think about mixing. For people that I haven't worked with before, sometimes I will also send an uncompressed version, just so they can hear what the mix is doing without the limiter at the end or the clipper at the end. So when I send passes to mastering, I usually send both, and I think it depends on the mastering engineer too. So I have a good relationship with a lot of mastering engineers. So a lot of times, if they have questions, they can call me directly. If I have things I want them to watch out for, or suggestions, I might include it in a note when we send it to them. So they know to tell me if there's an issue. So usually there's a version of the mix that's anywhere from 4 to 7 dB lower, I would say. than the loud version, which is, I'm going to guess, you know, RMS level would be maybe around between -7 and 10. Again, it depends on the music. So some, you know, like some genres of music, it's that loudness is almost like it's almost part of the sound. So you don't want to necessarily take it away from that, what it's naturally supposed to be doing. But I will send that version to mastering, so the mastering engineer isn't handcuffed by you know, something that's just completely looks like a square wave. So how do you deal with resonance frequencies? You get rid of them. Basically, that's 8 media 888. Matthias Latrop, do you think it's different that you feel mixing in the box of analog? Yeah, it's definitely different. But I will say, in the box with, you know, digital capability these days, you can do so much more than you could as in the analog days. So, for example, just doing a reverse reverb, for example, back in the day, you had to flip the tape over, record it, then flip it back, and it's a whole process. Now it's just a click of a button. So the convenience of digital is certainly the biggest thing when it comes to advantages. So, but as I mentioned, my ears are naturally prefer analog, so I tend to try to emulate that, how analog feels when I'm mixing. Better audio technologies. When given a rough from a client, how much of the final product would you say is your creative influence? Or do you just work enhancing the rough from the client? I think it depends on the client. Some clients want you to stay pretty close to to what they have, and some clients will tell you, you know, I've listened to this for 3 straight months. I want you to just take it somewhere completely else where I haven't thought of before. So I think it just really kind of depends. With popular records these days, a lot of it is done. Again, I'm not suggesting this is good or bad. I'm just saying it's just the nature of the beast. A lot of it is done by committee. And what I mean by that is there's multiple producers, there are multiple songwriters. There's, you know, so as a mixer, a lot of times you're getting feedback from a lot of different people. And you're trying to make sure that all these ideas get incorporated into the mix. So there are a lot of cooks. So sometimes it can take longer, but at the same time, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So in that situation, I think what I try to do is to try to basically stick close to where everyone seems to want to generally go. And you can tell once you start getting the feedback. And again, if you're doing this on your own and you don't have and if you don't have to answer to clients or whatever, then you can basically do whatever it is that you want. But in my case, I do have clients to answer to, so I try to make sure that they're at the end of the day that they're happy. I'm providing a service. So again, like it just really depends. Okay, so let's see. Okay, Yellen Yan. How about micro balance? Often lost in boost trim 0. dB somewhere. Does gain structure help it? And if so, what's your idea? Okay, so gain structure definitely helps. You want to make sure one part of your chain isn't being overloaded or under-serviced. So you just want to be sure everything is doing what, and again, part of this might be because of my analog days. You know, if you have to make sure that each device along the chain isn't being asked to do too much or too little what it's supposed to be doing. Um, so, again, so you want to make sure that, for example, your reverb sends are not just um, maxed out and it's crushing the unit and things are coming back different and so forth. So, but as far as the micro balance part of the question, yeah, that's kind of tough. Like I would say, um, really, when it comes down to it, for me anyway, if you start really getting that detail where you're doing things by point one of it, point one or point two of dB, it's maybe not necessary. So I'll just give you an example. A lot of times when someone tells me, um, sends me a comment back and says, "Okay, can you turn this up?" The first thing I do is I turn it up 2 dB because I know I'll be able to hear it. So at that point in time, I can tell whether that 2 dB is actually too much or too little. That part might be because I might have, again, I don't know, because I'm listening to the song, working for the song, on the song for the first time, I might have missed a part in what it's supposed to do within the song. So I'm relying on the creators to tell me what that part is supposed to be doing. So once it gets down to around half a dB, it's really not that huge a difference. So for me, probably the least I would go is 0.3 of a dB. Like sometimes, a quarter of a dB, that's like the minimum I would basically, at that point in time, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't know that it's going to make that much of a difference in terms of what that part is supposed to do within the song and the context of the song. So now it's different. If you're doing something, say with glitch music, for example, where there's all these little tiny bits and pieces of parts that have very specific functions. And so those take a lot longer. You have to focus on, you have to try to figure out how those parts fit. And at that point in time, this micro balancing thing might be more appropriate. But in terms of just generally speaking, I don't do too much like little tiny. Like if someone wants to hear something, I want to let them hear it. So. Newman Bean. I'm known apparently for working with producers over a long period. Jermaine Dupri, Stargate. Do you develop a specific sound with them together? Thank you for the question. I do tend to have really long-term relationships with my clients. So I don't know that I have a specific sound. I think they have the sound, and they're the ones that basically dictate how a record goes. So because once it gets to me to the mixing stage, if there's no need for me to reinvent the wheel, I won't do it. It's just not, it's not an ego thing for me. It's not necessary. And if I start doing stuff like that, then they're probably going to fire me. So it's a bit of a balance. I think you just have to understand like what it is that you're dealing with. So if something comes to you, great. Just try to do what you can and make it as best as it can be. And along the way, as things develop, they might have a lot of times it's an exchange of ideas, right? So they give you something, you mix it, you send it back to them. What you do triggers ideas in them, and they send back new stuff to you, new ideas, new arrangements, new parts, and then from there you go on. And then sometimes you scale back, sometimes you find a middle ground, or sometimes you just say this is now really much better. So it's a process. So Eduardo, so they're telling me that we're getting close to the end, but let me get to a couple more, maybe. What is your approach to get a crisp but not harsh top end? Yeah, I think it's just, again, the stuff that you're given, you're just basically using what you're given, you're enhancing it if necessary, but you're not like I won't add any artificial top end if it's not there. Like it's just not a that's not a thing. Like, and I don't know that you should focus necessarily on one part of the frequency. I think it's a don't lose sight of the whole, the forest for the trees kind of thing. So at the end of the day, you hopefully you can step back and you can take a listen to it and basically be able to say, okay, well, I did too much here, maybe not there, and then it kind of helps you get an idea. Another thing might be to listen to references. So if you have a mix that you might say you like a lot, maybe import that into your session or listen to it and kind of go, okay, well, here's what I think they did, and let me try to maybe approximate that, and it might give you an idea of where to go with the top end. So 8 Media 888, do you ever mix in solo? I find myself switching to mono too often. I almost never mix in solo, and I almost never hit mono. And I hate to say that, but it's just maybe it's a bad habit of mine, but I personally never listen in mono. So I don't know that most people do anymore. So I don't do it. Probably not a good thing to tell you, but I just don't do it. Noah Page, how do you tackle mixing in different spaces? Do you have one place you mix from, or do you move around a lot? Yeah, I don't move around hardly at all. I stay pretty much in one place because I can. Back in the day, if I'm working on a large format console, then I have to move all the way up and down the console to adjust things. But now, because of the control surface is right there. So yeah, and I almost never turn the volume also, and I know that sounds weird. And the only time I do turn it is when I have a client with me and they want to listen loud. So I'm almost always listening right around 82 to 85 dB. So that's and again, that might seem odd to people, and I'm not suggesting you do that. Do whatever works for you. If you're a producer and you're making tracks, I think it's helpful for you to turn it up loud, obviously, once in a while, because you feel inspired by the music. But for me, mixing, I tend to not do. I tend to just stay in one place and stay at one level. Okay, so Eli M, and I'll make this the last question if that's okay. What are your must-go favorite plugins? So companies, if that's okay with you. And I think I mentioned this at the top of the show if you missed it. The ones I kind of almost always go to are the UAD plugins, Softube, McDSP, Metric Halo, and Soundtoys. Those are probably the main 5 that I go to all the time. And those companies have been extremely good to me, so I see no reason to not continue using their products. So as far as an EQ, if I had a hardware unit, I would probably say a GML, but there's a software, a plugin version of that as well. Another EQ that I use all the time is the Star Pro Tools 7-band EQ. That's just like that's easy to use, it's clean, it works. The D2 Focusrite is used a lot. Compressors, the one, the Tube Tech is probably the one I would go to. If I had so those are the ones that I pretty much absolutely have to. Back in the day when I first started working in the box, again, back then, computers weren't that powerful, so DSP was kind of at a premium. So Metric Halo was one of the first channel strip plugins that had everything in it in one window. So I got used to that. I still use that all the time. So those are some of the ones that I pretty much use on a daily basis. Then the other special application stuff just kind of depends on what happens. So for example, like with I'm working with Eminike, massively talented producer, artist, songwriter. We have a setting for him for the Shimmer plugin in Valhalla. So he likes to use that occasionally to just add a little bit of flourish in certain vocal lines. So that's kind of a special thing with just him. So again, as you go along, you're going to find things that work for you that's best. And I read somewhere, and I could be wrong, I read somewhere that, Bob Clearmountain doesn't like line 6, the way those products make it sound. So again, that's him, but you might have something like that, and you might, but at the same time, you might also find something that really works for you. So, so some delays, for example, they all have their characters. So if you find one that you like a lot and it gets you the result that you want all the time, then just stick with it. Don't worry about what everybody else is using. So I'm sorry, there's a ton of questions, but I think we're running out of time. So I'm going to hand it back over to you guys. Maxime? Thank you. Oh, looks like there's a lot more. So for those, that want these questions answered, you can try to reach me from at my website, perhaps. I might not be able to get to everybody, but I'll try my best. info@philtan.com. Thank you very much. Everybody take care and stay safe. Be good to each other.